This simulation pairs Brazil, a continental, resource-rich agricultural and industrial giant, with Singapore, a hyper-dense city-state functioning as the financial, logistical, and technological command center of Asia. This model represents a classic mass-to-velocity symbiosis. Brazil provides the massive raw physical volume, food, energy, carbon sinks, that Singapore completely lacks, while Singapore provides the hyper-efficient capital allocation, legal infrastructure, and advanced maritime logistics to maximize the value of Brazil's economy. The baseline complementary exchange. Cut of meat emoji, Pillar 1, the Strategic Food Reserve and Agri-Tech Gateway. Singapore's vulnerability. Singapore imports over 90% of its food, making it highly vulnerable to global supply chain shocks and price spikes. Brazil's strength. Brazil is an agricultural superpower, leading the world in the export of beef, soy, sugar, and poultry. However, its shipments to Asia often face delays due to inefficient customs processing. The symbiotic fix. Brazil establishes a dedicated strategic protein pipeline directly to Singapore. Singapore builds automated, high-density cold storage mega warehouses at its ports, acting as Asia's primary storage vault for Brazilian meat and grain. The result: Singapore guarantees its long-term food security with a multi-month physical stockpile. In exchange, Singapore uses its advanced deep-water port systems to rapidly repackage and distribute Brazil's agriculture to the rest of the booming Southeast Asian market, acting as Brazil's exclusive Asian sales agent. Ship emoji, Pillar 2, Maritime Automation and Port Integration. Brazil's vulnerability. Brazil's primary ports, like the Port of Santos, suffer from chronic congestion, bureaucratic delays, and outdated logistics software, costing Brazilian exporters billions annually. Singapore's strength. Singapore operates the world's most advanced automated transshipment port, Tuas Port, utilizing AI, automated guided vehicles, AGVs, and predictive digital twins to load ships in record time. 2. The symbiotic fix. Singapore's port operators, PSA International, invest heavily in privatizing and modernizing Brazil's major maritime gateways. They deploy Singaporean port management software and AI scheduling systems directly into Brazilian docks. The result: by integrating their digital systems, a cargo ship leaving Santos can pre-clear customs digitally with Singapore while still in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. This slashes trans-Pacific transit friction and boosts Brazil's export speed by a projected 30%. Deciduous tree emoji, Pillar 3, Green Finance and Carbon Tokenization. Brazil's strength. Brazil holds the Amazon rainforest, the planet's largest terrestrial carbon sink, giving it unparalleled potential to generate high-value carbon offset credits. Singapore strength. Singapore is transforming into the premier carbon trading and green finance hub of Asia through platforms like Climate Impact X, CIX. The symbiotic fix. Singaporean financial tech firms work with the Brazilian government to tokenize the Amazon's carbon capture capability. They convert certified rainforest preservation zones into digital carbon credits traded directly on Singapore's financial exchanges. Global multinationals based in Asia buy these high-integrity Singapore-Brazil tokens to offset their emissions. The result: the money flowing through Singapore's stock exchange goes directly into funding sustainable infrastructure and protecting local communities in Brazil. This turns the Amazon into a highly lucrative, legally protected economic asset without cutting down a single tree. Why this partnership balances smoothly. The financial connection between the two economies is highly efficient. Because Singapore's currency, SGD, maintains massive stability, it acts as a perfect hedge against the volatility of the Brazilian real, BRL. Singaporean sovereign wealth funds, like JIC and Temasek, can deploy massive capital directly into Brazil's infrastructure, securing long-term, high-yield assets that fuel Brazil's growth while diversifying Singapore's wealth away from oversaturated Western markets. Would you like to explore how Singapore's sovereign wealth funds would structure their infrastructure investments in Brazil? The specific AI technologies Singapore would use to optimize Brazil's ports? Or would you like to simulate a completely different pair of nations from our list? Let me know what path your imagination wants to follow next. This simulation details the step-by-step diplomatic roadmap required to pitch, negotiate, and legally ratify the Singapore-Brazil Symbiosis Pact. For a partnership of this scale to succeed, it must pass through careful diplomatic stages to ensure both nations accept the terms before launching the 10-year projection. Phase 1, the initial pitch, the back-channel diplomacy. The agreement begins away from public scrutiny to prevent premature corporate speculation or political backlash. The venue, senior trade diplomats meet quietly on neutral ground during a global economic summit, such as the World Economic Forum. The pitch to Brazil, Singaporean envoys approach Brazil's Ministry of Foreign Affairs with a stark presentation. You are an agricultural and resource giant, but your ports lose billions to delays, and your currency fluctuates wildly. We don't want to buy your companies, we want to build a digital and physical hyperhighway that scales your export capacity by 30%. The pitch to Singapore, Brazilian diplomats present to Singapore's Ministry of Trade and Industry. You import 90% of your food and face severe climate transition pressures. We will give you exclusive, sovereign-backed access to a permanent food vault and certified carbon assets to anchor your green financial markets for the next century. Phase 2, the public narrative, winning domestic acceptance to ensure the citizens and political factions of both countries accept the pact. The governments launch distinct public narratives tailored to their domestic audiences. Brazil emoji, how it is sold to Brazil, focus, sovereignty and jobs, the national security angle. The government reassures the public that the Amazon is not being sold to foreigners. Instead, Singapore is paying Brazil to protect it through tech-backed carbon tokens. The economic angle, the pact is framed as a massive infrastructure booster. The modernization of the Port of Santos is sold as an immediate creator of thousands of engineering, construction, and logistics jobs for local Brazilian workers, funded entirely by Singaporean capital without increasing Brazil's national debt. Singapore emoji, how it is sold to Singapore, focus, survival and scale, the existential angle. The government presents the protein vault to the public as a crucial survival initiative against future global pandemics or supply chain blockades. The financial angle, Parliament is shown how deploying Temasek and JIC sovereign wealth into physical Brazilian assets provides a high-yield, tangible shield against inflation in volatile Western stock markets. Phase 3, the negotiation room, resolving the friction when the two cabinets sit down to draft the official treaty. 3 major friction points must be negotiated. Friction point 1, port control versus labor unions. The conflict. Brazil's powerful port worker unions fear that Singapore's AI and automated guided vehicles, AGVs, will eliminate local dock jobs. The compromise. Singapore agrees to a phased automation guarantee. No human worker will be replaced by a robot for the first 5 years. Instead, Singaporean tech will be used to optimize scheduling, tracking, and customs, while funding retraining programs for workers to manage the new digital systems. Friction point 2, the currency volatility problem. The conflict, the Brazilian real, BRL, fluctuates heavily, creating a risk for long-term Singaporean investments. The compromise, the creation of a symbiosis clearinghouse. All trade within the pact is calculated using a basket of currencies anchored by the stable Singapore dollar, SGD, shielding the contracts from sudden spikes in inflation. Friction point 3, verification of carbon integrity. The conflict, Singapore needs absolute proof that the rainforest zones backing their carbon tokens are truly protected from illegal logging. The compromise, Brazil allows Singaporean aerospace firms to deploy a dedicated constellation of radar imaging satellites over the designated Amazon zones. This provides automated, real-time data directly to the Singapore Stock Exchange, verifying the forest's health without violating Brazilian military sovereignty. Phase 4, the ratification, the signing ceremony. The treaty, officially named the Trans-Pacific Mass and Velocity Accord, is signed during a state visit in Brasilia. It passes through both the Brazilian National Congress and the Parliament of Singapore with overwhelming majorities, legally locking the two nations into the 10-year implementation framework. Now that the pact is officially signed and accepted by both nations, would you like to project ahead and simulate years 1 to 3, the infrastructure build? Project ahead and simulate years 4 to 7, the economic boom. Project ahead to year 10, the finished transformation, to see how both societies look? Let me know which phase of the future we should unlock next. Let's dive deeply into years 1 to 3, the infrastructure build. This initial phase is all about turning legal treaty language into concrete, steel, satellites, and digital code. During these first 36 months, the focus is not yet on massive trade volumes, but on laying the structural foundation. If the foundation is not built perfectly, the entire 10-year plan collapses. Year 1, the digital twin and the satellite constellation. Year 1 focuses entirely on mapping, software integration, and establishing the eyes in the sky. Month 1 to 6, the Port of Santos digital twin. Engineers from PSA Singapore arrive at the Port of Santos in Brazil. Instead of moving physical dirt, they install thousands of IoT, Internet of Things, sensors across every crane, berth, and gate. They feed this data into a supercomputer to create a digital twin, a real-time, 3D virtual replica of the entire port. This software allows AI to run millions of simulations to find exactly where bureaucratic bottlenecks and truck traffic jams occur before making physical changes. Months 7 to 12, launching the Amazon radar constellation. Singapore's aerospace sector, partnering with Brazil's space agency, AEB, launches a constellation of low Earth orbit, synthetic aperture radar, SAR, satellites. Unlike optical cameras, these radar satellites can see through thick Amazon cloud cover and smoke 24/7. This establishes the uncheatable verification system required to back the upcoming carbon tokens on the Singapore Stock Exchange. Year 2. The physical overhaul and the labor retraining. Year 2 bridges the gap between technology and the workforce, modernizing the physical infrastructure while honoring the labor compromise. Month 13 to 18, the smart gate infrastructure. Using the Year 1 data, the Port of Santos implements automated smart gates. Instead of truck drivers waiting hours to manually hand customs paperwork to an official, trucks are scanned moving at 15 miles per hour using RFID and biometric tracking. Customs clearance drops from an average of 24 hours down to 18 minutes. Month 19 to 24, the Polytechnic Retraining Program. To keep the union compromise, Singapore funds the Centro de Excelencia Logística in Santos. Instead of laying off dock workers, thousands of Brazilian operators are trained to become remote drone pilots, data analysts, and automated crane monitors. This shifts workers from dangerous, backbreaking physical labor into high-paying tech roles, solidifying local union support for the alliance. Year 3, the Protein Vault and the Financial Clearing House. Year 3 focuses on securing the physical supply chain and stabilizing the economic framework before the trade engines turn on full blast. Month 25 to 30, construction of the Singapore Protein Vault. In Singapore, construction concludes on a state-of-the-art, multi-story, fully automated cryogenic cold storage facility at the Tuas Megaport. This facility is built to hold a 6-month sovereign stockpile of frozen Brazilian beef, poultry, and grains. The facility runs on solar power and automated robotics, meaning food can be stored and retrieved with zero human contamination. Month 31 to 36, activating the clearing house. The Symbiosis Financial Clearing House opens twin offices in Sao Paulo and Singapore. The digital infrastructure is turned on, allowing companies to instantly convert Brazilian reais, BRL, to Singapore dollars, SGD, through a secure, blockchain-backed liquidity pool. This locks in price stability for agricultural contracts, completely removing the risk of sudden currency devaluation right before Year 4 begins. Chart with upwards trend emoji, status check at the end of Year 3. By the end of month 36, the Mass and Velocity Bridge is fully built. No massive new trade records have been broken yet, but the ports are hyper-efficient, the satellite verification is live, the workers are trained, and Singapore's physical food vault is open and ready. Now that the foundation is completely built, would you like to move slowly into years 4 to 7, the economic boom, to simulate how the actual trade, food shipments, and carbon tokens begin flowing across this new highway? With the physical and digital foundations securely laid, we move into years 4 to 7, the economic boom. This is the operational phase where the Mass and Velocity Bridge goes completely live. Cash, commodities, and tokenized carbon assets begin moving across the Pacific Ocean at record speeds. Year 4, the commodities pipeline and token generation. Year 4 is defined by the first massive, real-world shipments and the launch of the new financial market. Months 37 to 42, activating the strategic protein pipeline. The newly optimized Port of Santos handles its first fleet of automated mega freighters. Packed with millions of tons of Brazilian beef, poultry, and grains, these ships make non-stop journeys to Singapore. Because the automated smart gates and AS scheduling software are fully active, cargo loading times in Brazil drop by 40%. The ships arrive in Singapore ahead of schedule, completely filling the newly built protein vault. Months 43 to 48, the birth of the Amazon Carbon Token, ACT on the Singapore Stock Exchange, SGX, Climate Impact X launches the Amazon Carbon Token, ACT. Backed by the real-time satellite radar constellation launched in Year 1, Asian tech giants and manufacturing conglomerates buy millions of dollars of these tokens to offset their global carbon footprints. The capital flows instantly into Brazil's National Development Bank, BNDES, directly funding sustainable forest economies and native community initiatives. Year 5, market integration and the currency hedge. Year 5 transforms the two nations from simple trade partners into deeply integrated financial allies. Months 49 to 54, testing the symbiosis clearinghouse. Global market volatility hits South American currencies, but the Brazilian real, BRL, remains completely insulated within this trade corridor. Because the symbiosis financial clearinghouse anchors all transactions to a secure basket of currencies backed by the stable Singapore dollar, SGD, Brazilian farmers and Singaporean buyers bypass standard banking fees. Trade volume surges as companies realize this corridor offers total price predictability during global market turbulence. Months 55 to 60, expanding into agri-tech value chains. Brazilian agricultural firms establish secondary headquarters in Singapore. Instead of just selling raw food items, they use Singapore's elite labs to develop shelf-stable plant proteins and biosecure food packaging. Singapore officially becomes the exclusive distribution brain for Brazilian agricultural wealth across the entire Southeast Asian region. Year 6, the secondary logistics boom. Year 6 proves that the partnership generates a massive economic ripple effect, lifting industries beyond just food and carbon. Months 61 to 66. The rise of private freight corridors. Seeing the incredible speed of the Santos to Singapore maritime lane, private global shipping companies shift their main routes to utilize this optimized infrastructure. Secondary ports in Brazil begin mimicking the Santos Smart model, triggering a nationwide modernization of Brazil's coastal infrastructure. Months 67 to 72, joint venture tech funds. Singaporean venture capital firms, backed by sovereign funds, partner with Brazilian tech hubs in Sao Paulo to launch the Amazon Tech Fund. They invest in local Brazilian startups specializing in biomaterials, precision drone farming, and remote sensing tech, scaling Brazil's local knowledge economy. Year 7, the tipping point audit. Year 7 acts as the ultimate validation phase, proving the model's success to the rest of the world. Months 73 to 78, the midterm wealth report. A joint economic council publishes the results of the 7-year mark. Brazil reveals that the modernization of its ports and the influx of tokenized carbon capital has created 150,000 high-paying, sustainable local jobs. Singapore announces it has successfully achieved complete food security for its population, with a permanent 6-month buffer that insulates it from any global food crisis. Months 79 to 84, the global replication request. Other G7 nations and large developing countries look at the undeniable data. The Singapore-Brazil corridor becomes the premier global case study for international symbiosis, and multiple nations request the blueprint to build similar partnerships. Chart with upwards trend emoji, status check at the end of Year 7. By month 84, the partnership is a roaring financial engine. The risks of the initial infrastructure spend have completely paid off. Brazil has transformed its infrastructure and monetization of environmental protection, while Singapore has successfully insulated itself from its greatest geographic vulnerability, starvation. We are ready for the final step. Would you like to project forward to years 8 to 10, the mature transformation, to see exactly how both societies look, how their geopolitical power has shifted, and the final state of the alliance? We now enter years 8 to 10, the mature transformation. By this final phase, the alliance is no longer a new project or an economic experiment. It has become a permanent, foundational pillar of global trade, reshaping the daily lives of citizens in both countries and altering the geopolitical balance of power. Here is how the transformation reaches its full, mature scale by month 120. Year 8, Institutionalization and Institutional Trust. Year 8 is about normalizing the massive success of the previous years and building permanent academic and social bridges. Months 85 to 90, the generational talent pipeline. The temporary training centers of Year 2 mature into the Singapore Brazil Aerospace and Logistics University, with campus hubs in both Sao Paulo and Singapore. A permanent, bilateral exchange program allows top Brazilian software engineers to study automation in Singapore, while Singaporean environmental scientists live and work in the Amazon research hubs funded by the Amazon Carbon Tokens, ACT. Months 91 to 96, the Sovereign Wealth Reinvestment Loop. Singapore's sovereign wealth funds, Temasek and JIC, transition from funding ports to funding domestic Brazilian infrastructure like clean hydrogen rail networks. Because the investments are safe inside the Symbiosis Financial Clearing House, Singapore earns a highly stable, non-volatile return that funds the healthcare and retirement systems of its aging domestic population back home. Year 9, Geopolitical Realignment. Year 9 sees the alliance step onto the global stage as a unified, independent economic bloc that major world superpowers must respect. Months 97 to 102, the Neutral Corridor Shield. During a period of sudden trade tensions between the United States, Europe, and China, the Singapore-Brazil trade corridor remains completely untouched. Because the alliance uses its own independent digital customs network, its own satellite verification, and its own currency clearing house, it is fully insulated from external sanctions or foreign market manipulation. Months 103 to 108, the Green Standard Dictation. The Amazon Carbon Token, ACT, becomes the undisputed global gold standard for carbon credits. The United Nations and global carbon markets officially adopt the real-time satellite radar metrics created by Singapore and Brazil, effectively giving this partnership the power to dictate global environmental trading laws. Year 10, the Finnish transformation, the simulation ledger by month 120, both societies have fundamentally evolved. A final audit of the 10-year pact reveals an entirely new reality for both nations. Brazil emoji, the transformation of Brazil. Economic stability. Brazil's major maritime ports are now the most technologically advanced and efficient in the Western Hemisphere. The country has successfully diversified its economy away from raw commodity exports into high-tech logistics and environmental asset management. The Amazon asset, the Amazon rainforest, is completely preserved and expanding. It has become Brazil's highest-grossing economic asset, generating billions in annual revenue via Singaporean tokenization without a single acre being clear-cut for logging. Singapore emoji, the transformation of Singapore. Absolute sovereign security. Singapore has permanently solved its core existential vulnerability. The automated protein vault at the Tuas megaport holds an active, self-sustaining reserve of food, rendering the city-state completely immune to global famines, blockade attempts, or climate-driven food inflation. The climate capital of the world, Singapore has successfully transitioned from a standard financial hub into the absolute green finance and carbon capital of the planet, routing the world's environmental investments through its exchanges. Glowing star emoji, the ultimate strategic verdict. The 10-year simulation proves that symbiosis is vastly superior to standard globalization. Instead of one wealthy nation exploiting a developing nation's resources, this model paired physical mass with digital velocity to create a self-sustaining loop where both societies achieve total resilience, wealth, and sovereignty. We have successfully mapped out the entire 10-year journey of Brazil and Singapore. If you would like to continue our work, let me know. Would you like to study a different pair of nations from our list of 98 using this detailed timeline? Should we dive into the specific life of an individual citizen, like a port worker or a tech investor, living in year 10? Or would you like to shift gears to a completely new scenario? Tell me what you'd like to explore next. Integrating the tempo currency, the time-backed economic unit governed by our simulated peace bank, into the Singapore-Brazil bilateral framework completely alters the financial clearing mechanism. Instead of pricing food, infrastructure, and carbon credits in unstable fiat currencies or debt-based metrics, the tempo standardizes value across the corridor based entirely on human labor and life hours. Here is an analytical simulation of how the tempo currency is integrated into the 10-year Singapore-Brazil Pact. Hourglass emoji, 1. Defining the tempo value anchor. In the Peace Bank system, 1 tempo unit equals exactly 1 hour of standard, human productivity. The baseline exchange, whether an hour is worked by a crane operator at the Port of Santos or a software developer at Singapore's Tuas port, it enters the global ledger at the base rate of 1 tempo per hour. Insulation from inflation. Because a human hour remains exactly 60 minutes regardless of stock market fluctuations or printing presses, the trade between Brazil and Singapore becomes completely immune to inflation or the volatility of the Brazilian real, BRL, and Singapore dollar, SGD. Tractor emoji, 2. The tempo in action, year-by-year operational flows. Building construction emoji, years 1 to 3, upgrading infrastructure via labor credits. During the build phase, Singapore does not lend money to Brazil to automate the Port of Santos. That leads to economic friction. Instead, they use the Peace Bank's tempo credits. The transaction, Singapore sends engineers and port architecture software to Brazil. The Peace Bank logs the hours worked by Singaporean teams, issuing them tempo credits. The balance, Brazil pays for this tech injection not with cash, but by committing future harvest hours. Brazilian agricultural cooperatives pledge a specific number of labor hours dedicated to farming and processing beef and grains destined for Singapore's protein vault. Ear of rice emoji, years 4 to 7, pricing the food and carbon loop in time. When the trade engine goes fully live, commodities are priced directly in tempos. The protein pipeline. Instead of tracking changing market prices for meat, Singapore buys a shipment of beef using a flat tempo fee calculated by the total human hours required to organically raise, process, and transport it. The Amazon Carbon Shield, the Amazon Carbon Token, ACT, is retitled the Amazon Tempo Shield. The Peace Bank calculates how many human hours of community conservation, satellite monitoring, and local forestry are required to preserve 10,000 hectares of rainforest per month. Asian corporations on the Singapore Stock Exchange must buy these preservation hours using tempos they earned by exporting technological and medical services. Classical building emoji, 3. The structural benefits of the tempo over fiat trade. Feature, 1 standard fiat trading corridor, Brazilian real to Singapore dollar. The Peace Bank tempo corridor. Currency risk. High. Sudden inflation in Brazil disrupts long-term shipping contracts. 0. An hour of agricultural production always equals an hour of tech service. Debt burden. Brazil must take on billions in foreign debt to afford Singaporean automation. 0. Infrastructure is funded entirely through balanced human hour exchanges. Worker wealth. Port union strike due to fears of corporate wage suppression, WNBA, 2020 American athlete strikes. Guaranteed equity. Workers are paid directly in tempos, securing a global asset pegged to time. Meridian globe emoji, 4. The geopolitical tipping point, year 10 by year 10, the tempo currency has allowed Brazil and Singapore to build a completely closed-loop economy. If an external global crisis hits the traditional banking sector, the Singapore-Brazil trade corridor doesn't even notice. The factories keep running, the ships keep sailing, and the food keeps moving because the underlying value of their trade, human time and the health of the planet, remains structurally constant. It is incredible to see how adding the Peace Bank's currency ties this whole geopolitical model together. Would you like to explore how a local Brazilian port worker would spend their earned tempos on everyday items? How the central banks of Singapore and Brazil would legally transition to this time-backed ledger? Or would you like to draft a mock transaction ledger between a Brazilian farm and a Singaporean distributor? Let me know what path your curiosity wants to follow next. 1. How a local Brazilian port worker spends tempos. In year 10, a dock worker named Tiago at the port of Santos receives his wages directly to a digital tempo wallet provided by the Peace Bank. His daily life and local economy have completely adapted to this time-backed currency. The daily ledger: Tiago works an 8-hour shift operating an automated cargo crane. His wallet is instantly credited with 8 tempos. Because 1 tempo equals exactly 1 hour of human life value, its purchasing power never drops due to inflation. Buying local goods: Tiago walks to a local grocery store in Santos. The store owner prices items based on production time. A basket of locally grown vegetables and fresh bread costs 0.5 tempos, representing the 30 minutes of agricultural labor required to produce it. The global crossover market: Tiago wants to buy a new smartphone manufactured via the Singapore Tech Corridor. Because the entire network runs on the Peace Bank ledger, the smartphone is priced at 24 tempos, reflecting 24 hours of precision tech manufacturing time. Tiago can buy it directly using his labor credits, completely bypassing international currency conversion fees or credit card debt. 2. How the central banks transition to the time-backed ledger. The transition from traditional fiat currencies, the Brazilian real and Singapore dollar, to the tempo ledger is managed through a phased legal and digital migration protocol. Phase 1, the dual pricing mandate, months 1 to 12, the Banco Central do Brasil and the Monetary Authority of Singapore, MAS, pass joint legislation requiring all bilateral trade contracts to display prices in both local fiat currency and tempos. This allows corporate accounting systems to normalize time value tracking. Phase 2, asset-backed pegging, months 13 to 24, the central banks establish the bilateral tempo reserve. The central banks deposit physical assets, Singapore's gold reserves and Brazil's agricultural commodity yields, into a shared vault. This guarantees that if a citizen wants to exit the tempo ecosystem, the central banks will legally cash them out into traditional currency based on a stable, audited asset conversion rate. Phase 3, direct ledger integration, months 25 to 36, the banks launch a shared, decentralized central bank digital currency, CBDC, framework managed by the Peace Bank. Commercial banks in both nations update their digital infrastructure, allowing everyday citizens to open tempo accounts right alongside their standard checking accounts. 3. Mock transaction ledger, Brazilian farm to Singapore distributor. This audited transaction sheet from the Peace Bank ledger shows how a shipment of organic beef moves across the Pacific Ocean using zero debt, zero fiat money, and zero interest rates. Peace Bank Central Ledger, Transaction ID, #BRSG 99822. Origin Fazenda Sol Nascente, Mato Grosso, Brazil, Destination Chungcheong Distribution Hub, Tuas Port, Singapore, Commodity Volume, 20 metric tons of premium organic beef. Life cycle phase. Description of labor inputs. Ledger action. Value, tempos. 1. Ranching and processing. 120 hours of ranching, veterinary care, and biosecure packaging in Mato Grosso. Debited from Singapore, credited to Brazil Farm. Plus 120.00. 2. Inland rail logistics. 15 hours of electric rail transit from Mato Grosso to the port of Santos. Debited from Singapore, credited to Brazil Rail Company. Plus 15.00. 3. Smart port loading. 5 hours of automated crane operation and AI custom scheduling at Santos. Debited from Singapore, credited to Santos Port Union. Plus 5.00. 4. Trans-Pacific transit. 40 hours of automated maritime fleet monitoring and fuel cell grid navigation. Debited from Singapore, credited to Shared Fleet Co-op. Plus 40.00. 5. Tuas Vault intake. 10 hours of robotic offloading and cryogenic placement into the protein vault. Debited from Singapore, credited to Singapore Dock Team. Plus 10.00. Total transaction cost. Total human hours invested to deliver asset. Settled instantly via Peace Bank. 190.00 tempos. The settlement, the Singapore distributor instantly pays 190 tempos from its account. The Peace Bank automatically disperses the exact time credits to the farmers, train drivers, dock workers, and sailors who kept the supply chain moving. No bank took a transaction fee, and no currency fluctuation altered the final value of the food. This completes our full-scale model of time-backed international symbiosis. As we look to our next chapter, let me know. Would you like to see how a third nation might join this tempo currency network? Should we explore how the Peace Bank handles emergency situations, like a crop failure? Or would you like to shift to a brand new creative simulation today? I am ready to follow your imagination wherever it goes. When a sudden crisis hits, such as a catastrophic crop failure in Brazil due to extreme weather or a massive supply chain disruption in Singapore, a traditional financial system usually spirals into a panic. Banks panic, food prices skyrocket, and insurance companies delay payouts while arguing over legal fine print. Under the Peace Bank framework, because the economy is backed by human time, tempos, rather than speculative debt, emergencies are handled through an automated, humanitarian mechanism called the Time Resilience Protocol. Here is exactly how the Peace Bank manages a severe emergency, using a simulated multi-month severe drought in Brazil's agricultural heartland as our test case. Phase 1. Activating the Time Reserve Safety Net. In a standard economy, if a farm loses its crops, it loses its revenue, defaults on its bank loans, and goes bankrupt. The Peace Bank prevents this by decoupling survival from immediate physical output. Freezing time debts. If a Brazilian agricultural co-op has pledged 1,000 future harvest hours to Singapore but loses its entire crop to a drought, the Peace Bank instantly freezes that obligation. Because there is no compound interest on a time-based ledger, the farm faces zero financial penalties, zero accruing interest, and zero threat of foreclosure. The emergency labor influx. Instead of cutting wages or laying off workers, the Peace Bank continues to pay the farm workers their standard daily wages in tempos. However, their labor is redirected. Instead of harvesting non-existent crops, the workers are credited tempos to build climate-resilient infrastructure, such as installing automated drip irrigation networks or digging deepwater solar wells to prepare for the next season. Phase 2. Activating Singapore's physical vault. While Brazil is rebuilding its farms, Singapore faces an immediate threat of food shortages. This is where the physical velocity of the 10-year build pays off. Unlocking the Protein Vault. Singapore's Ministry of Sustainability instantly opens the multi-story, cryogenic food reserve built at Tuas Port during Year 3. Because the vault permanently holds a 6-month sovereign stockpile, the city-state's food supply remains completely uninterrupted. Neutralizing price inflation. In a traditional market, a crop failure in Brazil would cause grocery store prices in Singapore to instantly double. Under the tempo standard, because the food sitting in the vault was already purchased and logged at a fixed production time cost, e.g., 0.5 tempos for a basket of goods, prices at Singapore supermarkets remain completely flat. Speculators are legally and digitally blocked from using a crisis to inflate prices. Phase 3, the Global Symbiosis Offset. Calling in partners if the emergency is so severe that Brazil cannot recover within a single harvest cycle, the Peace Bank scales the response by tapping into its wider web of symbiotic nations, such as our previously simulated partnerships like Vietnam or Nigeria. The Time Swap Accord. The Peace Bank central computer scans the global ledger for an alliance partner with an agricultural surplus, for example, Nigeria's potash-boosted yam and grain sectors. The rerouting. The Peace Bank pays the Nigerian agricultural sector in tempos to immediately divert a portion of their food shipments to Singapore to replenish the Tuas vault. The future balance. Brazil does not owe money to Nigeria or Singapore for this rescue. Instead, the Peace Bank logs a bilateral restoration credit. Once Brazil's new irrigation systems are completed and their soil recovers, Brazil will repay the ledger by routing future engineering support, carbon assets, or agricultural machinery back to Nigeria. The ultimate crisis verdict. The Peace Bank model proves that human life hours and food security should never be subject to market speculation. By replacing debt with time, An emergency transforms from a financial catastrophe that destroys families into a temporary logistical hurdle that the international community solves through structured, mutual aid. It is incredible to see how resilient a time-backed society is when a crisis hits.